Winterfell was colder than usual. Snowflakes drifted down slowly, covering the courtyard in a soft white sheet. Ned Stark stood by the window of his chambers, watching the snow fall with a heavy heart. He had received word that Robert Baratheon was on his way to Winterfell again, but this visit was different. This time, Robert was not coming as a friend. He was coming with questions Ned had avoided answering for years, questions about Lyanna. It had been over a decade since Lyanna Stark died. To Robert, she was still the love of his life, stolen by Rhaegar Targaryen. But to Ned, she was more than that. She was his sister, yes, but she was also the keeper of a terrible secret, one that could destroy kingdoms. As the gates of Winterfell opened, Robert's black banner with the golden stag appeared, fluttering in the wind. He rode in with a few trusted men, his face aged and tired, but his eyes were sharp. He dismounted, without a word, and walked straight towards the great hall. Ned met him there, standing firm and calm, as always. "Robert," Ned said, giving a small nod. "Don't Robert me, Ned," Robert snapped, his voice full of buried anger. "I've ridden north in the dead of winter because I want the truth. I want to know what really happened to Lyanna." Ned's jaw clenched. "You already know what happened. She was taken by Rhaegar. She died. That's the end of it." But Robert wasn't satisfied. "No, that's the lie you've been feeding everyone for years. I know you, Ned. You never lie. Unless you're protecting someone. Was she really taken? Or did she go willingly?" The hall fell silent. Even the servants froze. Ned turned away, walking slowly to the fireplace. The flames reflected in his eyes. "She made a choice," he said finally. "A choice you never accepted." Robert's fists tightened. "So it's true. She left me for him. After all I did, after all I fought for." "She didn't want a crown," Ned said quietly. "She wanted freedom. You loved her, Robert, but you never really understood her." Robert's face twisted with pain and fury. "She was mine." "No one belongs to anyone," Ned replied firmly. "She made her own path." Robert took a step closer. "Then why did you hide her son? Why did you raise him as your own bastard?" Ned froze. He hadn't expected that. His secret was cracking. "Open? You don't know what you're talking about," he said sharply. "Oh, I do," Robert hissed. "Jon Snow, he's not your son, is he? He's Lyanna's and Rhaegar's." Ned's silence was the only answer Robert needed, a silence that confirmed everything. Robert's eyes burned. "You lied to me, Ned. After all our years of friendship, after all our battles, you betrayed me." Ned turned, his face filled with sorrow. "I protected her child. I protected you. If the world knew he had Targaryen blood, you would have killed him." "I had every right to," Robert shouted. "He's a dragon's spawn, the son of the man who stole my bride." "He's just a boy," Ned said, "an innocent. He's never done you harm. But he will," Robert growled. "Targaryens always do." Their voices echoed through the hall like thunder, and just like that, two friends, brothers in arms, stood on opposite sides of a secret that had haunted them both for years. The love of one woman, the lies built to protect her memory, and the child born from that love now stood between them. The fire cracked behind them as the cold wind from outside blew in. Everything was about to change. The great hall of Winterfell was no longer a place of warmth and brotherhood. The silence between Robert and Ned stretched like a sword held at the throat, sharp, dangerous, and one wrong word away from drawing blood. Robert's boots echoed against the stone floor as he stepped forward, his hand twitching near the hilt of his sword. The firelight flickered across his weathered face, revealing the pain of a man who had loved deeply, lost tragically, and now stood on the edge of betrayal. "You kept him alive," Robert said, his voice low and tight. "You kept his son alive, while I slaughtered every other Targaryen I could find." Ned's eyes didn't flinch. "He was a baby, Robert, an innocent." Robert scoffed. And what about the others? Elia Martell's children? They were just babes too, weren't they? But I didn't weep for them, no one did. Why was he so special? Because he was Lyanna's, Ned replied quietly. That name, Lyanna, hung in the air like a ghost. It silenced Robert more than anything else. He turned away, pacing slowly to the edge of the hall, where a large tapestry hung. One Lyanna. Herself had helped weave years ago. He stared at it for a moment, jaw clenched, eyes distant. She could have had a crown, Robert muttered. I would have given her anything. I was ready to burn the world for her. She never wanted that, Ned said softly. She didn't want to be a queen. She wanted to be heard. She wanted to be free. Robert turned sharply. And Rhaegar gave her that? Ned said nothing, but his silence was more damning than any words. The king's voice cracked as he whispered, So she loved him. The Dragon Prince. Ned looked down. Yes. Robert stumbled back like he'd been struck. His breath came ragged, his eyes wide and hollow. And you let me hate him for years. Let me paint her as a victim while all along she left me. She didn't leave you, Robert, Ned said, voice hardening. She ran from the cage you were building around her. Those words hit harder than a sword. Robert's face twisted with hurt and fury, but deep down he knew it was true. He had loved Lyanna, yes, but he had also tried to possess her. In his dreams, she had always worn his crown, stood beside him, bore his children. Never once had. He imagined what she wanted. I fought a war for her, Robert said bitterly. I spilled blood for her. No, Ned said, his voice turning cold. You fought a war for your pride, for vengeance. Lyanna's voice was never part of that war. Robert reached for a goblet of wine on the table and threw it against the wall, shattering it with a loud crash. You lied to me, Ned. For 17 years, you let me drink beside your bastard, never saying a word. I kept the boy alive, Ned said firmly. If I had told you, he'd be dead, like the rest. You would have taken your rage out on him. I'm not a monster, Robert growled. No, Ned said, but you were angry. And angry men do monstrous things. Robert's breath hitched. He couldn't deny the truth in Ned's voice. He remembered what he did to the Targaryen children during the rebellion. He remembered how quickly justice turned to revenge. Why didn't you trust me? Robert asked, his voice suddenly quiet, almost broken. Ned looked at him with tired eyes. Because you stopped being the man I knew. After Lyanna died, you turned to rage and wine. I didn't see my brother in you anymore. I saw a king who would do anything to wipe out the Targaryen name. Robert sat down heavily on the bench, rubbing his face. And the boy, John, does he know? No, Ned said. He believes I am his father. He believes his mother was a maid I never named. He carries the weight of shame for a lie I told to protect him. Robert looked up. Does he act like a Targaryen? Ned allowed a small smile. He acts like a Stark. He's honorable, stubborn, quiet. He's good. The fire crackled between them. The storm in Robert's chest was still raging, but somewhere beneath all the grief and anger, something else was stirring. Guilt, maybe. Regret. I could have raised him, Robert said suddenly. As my own. If he was Lyanna's, you would have raised him as a weapon, Ned replied, as another Baratheon to rule. But John isn't meant to rule. He's meant to live. Robert stood, shoulders sagging under the weight of the past. What happens now, Ned? You think I can go back to King's Landing and pretend I never learned this? I don't expect you to pretend, Ned said. But I expect you to protect her son, for her sake. And if I don't? Ned stepped closer, face stern. Then you'll lose me, forever. And you'll prove Lyanna right, that the world she feared, the world she tried to escape, still exists. Robert stared at him for a long moment. Two friends, two brothers, now divided by a woman long dead and a child she left behind. Outside, the wind howled through the towers of Winterfell, like Lyanna's spirit watching, waiting, aching. "I need time," Robert finally said, his voice hoarse. "I need to think." "Take it," Ned said, though his heart was heavy. Robert turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing in the empty hall. Ned was left alone, staring into the flames, wondering if the boy he raised would survive the truth, and if their friendship ever would. The halls of Winterfell were quieter than usual the next morning. The air was heavy with unspoken words, and the servants moved with nervous steps, casting glances toward the guest chambers where King Robert Baratheon had locked himself in since last night. Ned Stark hadn't slept. He had stood by the godswood for hours, listening to the wind rustle through the ancient weirwood trees, hoping the old gods would offer him some kind of peace. But none came. Not for him. Not for Robert. And certainly not for Jon Snow. The boy he had raised as a son, the boy who believed his very existence was a stain on Ned Stark's honor, the boy who would one day learn that his life was both a miracle and a curse. Ned clenched his fists. He had fought wars, made hard decisions, buried friends, but nothing terrified him more than what would happen if the truth ever escaped these northern walls. And now Robert knew. Later that morning, Ned found Robert in the crypts. Of course he was there. Where else would he go? The king stood silently in front of Lyanna's tomb, staring at her stone figure like he had the day he came to Winterfell the first time, years ago. But this time there was no wine in his hand, only pain in his eyes. "She looks peaceful," Robert muttered as Ned approached. "Too peaceful after the storm she left behind." "She didn't mean to hurt you," Ned said softly. "She wanted to be free, but freedom always has a price." Robert gave a sad laugh. "Aye, and we're the ones paying it." They stood in silence for a while. The cold of the crypt seeped into their bones. "I thought I knew what love was." "Ned," Robert said finally, "but maybe I just loved the idea of her, the wild girl on a horse, all fire and laughter. Not the woman who ran from me." Ned placed a hand on his shoulder. "We both lost her, Robert, just in different ways." Robert turned to him, his eyes suddenly sharper. "You raised her son, kept him hidden from me, but now I ask you, what do you plan to do with him now?" Ned hesitated. "What do you mean?" "You can't keep lying forever," Robert said. "Sooner or later someone will see it. He has Targaryen blood. He has the look. He has the name." "No one knows his name," Ned snapped. "Not even he does." Robert stepped closer. "But you do. What is it, Ned? What did she name him?" Ned looked away, as if the name itself burned. "Aegon. His name is Aegon Targaryen." Robert reeled back. "By the gods! She gave him the name of her dead husband's son? She truly did love Rhaegar." Ned didn't respond. Robert's face darkened. "You know what this means, don't you? If the lords of Westeros found out, if the wrong people found out, he'd be dead by morning," Ned said bitterly. "That's why I've kept the secret all these years." Robert nodded slowly. "Then let's keep it. One last lie. For her," Ned blinked. "You'd protect him?" "I'm not doing it. For him," Robert said. "I'm doing it for her. She made her choice. She gave her life to keep that child safe. I won't be the one to undo it." Ned exhaled, relief washing over him like warm rain. "But," Robert added, "you must never tell the boy. Never let him know what blood runs through his veins, not until the time is right." "And if that time never comes?" Ned asked. "Then the lie becomes the truth," Robert said grimly, "and he dies a Snow." Ned closed his eyes. It wasn't justice, it wasn't right, but it was the only way. As they made their way back toward the castle, Robert stopped suddenly. "There's something else," he said. "You remember what Rhaegar said before the trident?" Ned frowned. "What?" Robert's voice dropped. "He said the song of ice and fire has begun. like a prophecy or some madness. I didn't think much of it then, just the ravings of a dying prince. But now, he looked at Ned. Jon is the son of Stark and Targaryen, ice and fire. Maybe Rhaegar wasn't mad after all. Ned felt a chill deeper than the cold air. You think he's meant for something? Ned asked. Robert shrugged. Who knows? Prophecies. Or wind. But he's more than a bastard, that much is clear. Just make sure he stays hidden, because if the realm ever finds out... He didn't finish. He didn't have to. That night, Jon Snow sat quietly in the Winterfell courtyard, watching. Ghost chased snowflakes with puppy clumsiness. He looked up when Ned approached. Is something wrong, father? Jon asked. Ned looked at the boy, no, the young man. His black curls, his solemn face, his Stark-like silence. And he wanted to tell him everything. About Lyanna, about Rhaegar, about who he really was. But instead he knelt and placed a hand on Jon's shoulder. You're a good man, Jon, he said. Always remember that. No matter what anyone says about your name or your birth, you're my son, and that means everything. Jon smiled faintly. Thank you, father. Ned walked away with a heavy heart. The boy had no idea he was born of ice and fire. No idea that his very blood could shake the kingdoms, and perhaps that was for the best. For now. The following days were cold in Winterfell, not just in weather, but in spirit. Robert stayed longer than he was welcome, though no one dared to say it aloud. The king who once laughed loudest now wandered the halls like a man haunted by his own past. He drank less, spoke little, and when he looked at Jon Snow from across the yard, it was with an expression that neither Ned nor the boy could read, half guilt, half fear. Jon noticed the change. He was no fool. Though only a young man, he had lived a life on the edge of every room, always watching, always wondering why he didn't belong. And now, the king's presence only deepened the questions already burning inside him. One evening, Jon sat with Samwell Tarly in the rookery, watching the ravens settle into their nests. He keeps looking at me, Jon said quietly. Sam glanced up. The king? Jon nodded. Like he knows something, like he's trying to figure out if I know it too. Sam didn't answer right away. Then he said, Do you think you do? Jon looked down. I don't know. All my life I've been told I'm a bastard, that my mother was some tavern girl or maybe a washerwoman. Lord Stark never talks about her, never even names her. I used to dream she was a noble woman who died giving birth to me. Sam offered a sad smile. Maybe she was. Jon stared at the darkening sky. It's strange. I've fought wildlings, I've seen White Walkers, and yet the scariest thing is not knowing where I came from. Down below, Ned stood near the stables, watching his son from afar. Robert stood beside him, arms crossed. He's like her, Robert said. The way he looks at the world, quiet, serious, but there's fire underneath. Ned said nothing. I keep wondering what would have happened if she'd lived, Robert continued. If Rhaegar had died sooner, would she have come back? Would she have come to me? No, Ned said simply. Robert turned his head. You're sure? I know my sister, Ned said. She wouldn't have lived as someone's prize, not yours, not Rhaegar's. She wanted a life of her own making, Robert exhaled. She should have had it, and now her son, he's trapped in your name, in your silence. That silence is the only reason he's alive. Robert rubbed his beard. He's frowning. It won't protect him forever. Secrets always break, Ned. Sometimes loud, sometimes like a whisper. Later that night, as the moon rose high and snow dusted the castle walls, a conversation stirred the dead more than the living. Littlefinger had arrived unannounced, slipping through the gates like a shadow wrapped in silk and sarcasm. I heard the king was brooding in the north, Peter Baelish said, a smirk tugging at his lips. I couldn't resist visiting old friends. Ned narrowed his eyes. You're not welcome here, Peter. Come now, Lord Stark. Baelish replied smoothly. "We were almost family once, remember?" Ned's face hardened. "You tried to take my sister from her betrothed, then dueled Brandon for it." Baelish gave a lazy shrug. "And yet she still didn't choose either of us, did she?" The word choose hit deeper than Ned expected. Robert, seated near the fire, glanced at Baelish. "You're always crawling where you shouldn't be, Pater. What do you want?" Baelish stepped forward, smiling as if he held a secret no one else knew. "I've been in King's Landing long enough to know whispers travel faster than ravens. Some say the king has been asking questions about a boy with black hair and grey eyes, a boy with a bastard's name and a lord's bearing." Ned's eyes darkened. "Careful, Baelish." "Always," Petter said with mock respect. "But if secrets are spilling, perhaps you should know. Queen Cersei has spies. Many, and if she suspects there's a Targaryen alive, she'll burn every corner of the north to find him." Robert stood, suddenly sober. "She suspects?" Baelish tilted his head. "She suspects everyone, Your Grace. That's her nature. But lately, she's been too quiet, which is worse than noise." Ned felt his stomach turn. The Queen's hatred for the Targaryen name was only rivaled by Robert's former rage. "And if she ever discovered Jon's truth, her children would not be safe with a rival heir walking free. We need to send Jon away," Ned said quietly. Robert looked at him. "Where?" "Somewhere he'll be safe. Somewhere no one would look." "For a Targaryen?" Baelish smiled, amused. "You mean the Wall? That's clever. Let the bastard become a brother of the Night's Watch, sworn to celibacy, far from thrones and daggers. Poetic." "It's not poetic," Ned said. "It's punishment, for a truth he doesn't even know." "But it's survival," Robert added. "And survival is more important than justice." And so the plan was made in silence, with the ghost of Lyanna watching from her cold tomb. Jon Snow would leave Winterfell, believing it was his choice, believing it was his shame that sent him to the Wall. He would not know that it was his blood that made him dangerous, that it was his birth that threatened the realm, that the king who once would have killed him now saved his life by sending him away. And far from Winterfell, in King's Landing, a queen lay awake in her bed, fingering a letter she had intercepted, a letter bearing no name but carrying too much meaning. "A bastard in the north," Cersei whispered to herself, "or perhaps something more." Her eyes gleamed with suspicion, with hunger. And so the game had begun, not just for thrones, but for the last ember of a forgotten fire, the one Rhaegar spoke of before his death, the one Lyanna gave her life to protect, and Jon Snow, unaware of his blood, of his legacy, or the storm forming beyond the Wall, was already part of it. Jon Snow left Winterfell with more silence than farewells. There was no grand send-off, no feast, no tears, just the cold bite of northern wind and a heavy heart in his chest as he rode beside Benjen Stark toward the Wall. Jon believed he was making a noble choice, giving up his name and desire for recognition to serve the realm. But beneath his brave front, a question echoed louder than the clatter of hooves. Jon Snow left Winterfell with more silence than farewells. There was no grand send-off, no feast, no tears, just the cold bite of northern wind and a heavy heart in his chest as he rode beside Benjen Stark toward the Wall. Jon believed he was making a noble choice, giving up his name and desire for recognition to serve the realm. But beneath his brave front, a question echoed louder than the clatter of hooves. Why did Father let me go so easily? He had looked into Ned's eyes before leaving, expecting some hesitation, some final moment of doubt. But Lord Stark had only embraced him tightly, longer than usual, and whispered, "You're more than they say." Never forget that. Jon didn't understand what it meant. Ned watched from the battlements, his heart pulled in two directions. Part of him felt relief. Jon was out of reach from King's Landing spies, away from Cersei's grasp. But another, Part of him broke, knowing he had just sent his sister's only child into a life of exile, a punishment wrapped as duty. Robert stood beside him, arms crossed. "He'll be safer there." "Yes," Ned replied. "But will he be whole?" Robert didn't answer. Days later, the storm Ned feared finally made its way north, not of snow or wind, but of whispers. A raven arrived from King's Landing. The seal was Lannister gold. Ned read the letter slowly, twice, and still he couldn't believe what it said. Cersei knows, or at least she suspects, enough to act on it. Enough to make threats. The letter was masked in courtly language, but its intent was sharp as a blade. "My husband speaks too often of the North, of a boy he once ignored. Tell me, Lord Stark, are there secrets hidden behind those walls colder than the snow itself? Best to keep your wolves close before lions come hunting." Ned crushed the letter in his hand. "How?" he muttered. "She's been watching," Robert said from behind him. "Far better than we have, and Peter was right. Her silence is dangerous." Ned turned to his old friend. "You need to protect Jon now. If she so much as confirms who he is." Robert held up a hand. "I'll protect him. I gave you my word." Ned stepped closer. "No, I want more than words. I want action." Robert raised a brow. "You're demanding something from your king." "I'm asking it from my brother," Ned said. "For Lyanna." Robert's face softened. "Then tell me what you need." "Shield the wall, send funds, reinforce the command at Castle Black. If Cersei ever tries to reach beyond the realm, I want her to find nothing but ice and steel." Robert nodded. "Done." But not everyone in Winterfell agreed with Jon's departure. Arya cried in silence, punching her pillow at night. Robb wandered the courtyard with restless feet, unsure how to fill the space his half-brother once stood in. And Sansa, though distant from Jon, noticed the shift too. Winterfell felt emptier, colder, and Catelyn. She watched Ned with suspicious eyes. She had always resented Jon, but now she resented the weight in her husband's face. She knew it. It wasn't grief for a bastard. It was something deeper, something hidden. In King's Landing, Cersei Lannister paced her chambers like a lioness in heat, agitated, hungry, dangerous. She had summoned Varys, but the spider remained cryptic as always. "There is smoke in the north," he said, "but not yet fire." Cersei narrowed her eyes. "I want names. I want bloodlines. I want to know why Jon Snow matters enough to make." Robert quiet. Varys simply bowed. "I serve the realm, your grace, and sometimes serving means waiting." She threw a goblet at the wall. "I don't have time to wait." The crown sat on her husband's head, but Cersei ruled through shadow and threat. And now a boy of Targaryen blood, hidden and raised by a Stark, threatened the legacy she built for her children. "I want him dead," she whispered to herself. "Before he learns who he is. Before the people start singing songs." And far across the continent, Jon Snow stood atop the wall, looking out into the vast, empty lands beyond. The wind howled against him, freezing his cheeks, but he did not move. He felt peace for the first time, not because of where he was, but because of what he had left behind. Still, something pulled at him, a feeling deep in his bones, a fire buried in the snow. Back in Winterfell, Ned took a quiet journey alone to the crypts. He carried with him a bundle wrapped in old cloth, and in it an old letter Lyanna had written to him the day before her death. He had never shared it with anyone, not even Robert. He knelt before her statue and laid the letter gently at her feet. "I sent him away," he said. "I did what you asked. But now the wolves are circling. I don't know how long I can protect him." The torch beside him flickered as if answering. "He's growing into something more. I see it. The way he carries himself. He's more than just your son. He might be what this world needs, or what it fears most." A gust of wind blew through the crypt, and for a moment Ned thought he heard her voice. "Promise me, Ned." He lowered his head. "I did," he whispered, but I never promised it wouldn't break me." He rose, leaving the letter where it lay, and walked back into the cold. That night, Robert Baratheon prepared to leave Winterfell. His carriage was loaded. His men waited. But he lingered in the hall, staring at the weirwood carved into the walls. Ned approached him. "Take care in the capital," he said. Robert grunted. "It's not the capital I fear, it's the queen beside me." "You're not safe," Ned warned. "If she learns what we did, what we protected, she will not forgive." Robert smiled grimly. "She forgave nothing to begin with." Then he placed a heavy hand on Ned's shoulder. "If anything happens to me," he said quietly, "tell the boy the truth. One day, not yet, but one day." Ned nodded. "You have my word." And with that, the king left the north. Behind him, he left a trail of guilt, buried truths, and a boy beyond the wall who did not yet know that the blood in his veins had once sparked a war, and might again. Snow fell thicker than usual that winter. It blanketed the north in silence, muffling sounds, burying tracks, and hiding sins like a shroud. But not all things stayed buried. Jon Snow stood atop the wall, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air. The Night's Watch had changed him. His eyes were sharper, his voice steadier, and the boy who once begged for purpose had begun to grow into something colder. But inside, the ache of not knowing still clung to him like frostbite. Who am I, really? He'd asked himself more than once in the dark. Sam had no answer. No one did, until the raven came. Not the usual black bird with standard parchment. No, this raven carried a message without a sigil, without a sender. Just a single folded piece of thick parchment. Jon read the words once, then twice. He didn't speak for an hour after. "Your name is not Snow. You are the son of Lyanna Stark. She died to protect you. You were never meant to be forgotten." There was no signature, no seal, but Jon knew who had sent it, Lord Eddard Stark, and suddenly nothing made sense anymore. Back in Winterfell, Ned sat alone in the Godswood, staring at the red leaves of the ancient weirwood tree. The snow gathered in his hair, untouched. The secrets were beginning to breathe on their own now. He had tried to bury the truth with honor, but truth was never content with the dark. Like ice, it crept through cracks, patient and silent, until it split the stone. Catelyn confronted him that evening. She had seen the change. The nights where he sat alone, the distant look in his eyes whenever Jon's name was spoken. The guilt he carried like armor. "Tell me, Ned," she said coldly. "Tell me who the boy really is." He looked at her, finally tired of lies. "He's not mine," Ned whispered, "but he is blood, my sister's son." Catelyn staggered back like she'd been slapped. "All these years," she gasped. "You let me hate an innocent boy," Ned nodded, voice broken. "I had no choice. If Robert had known, he would have killed him." She looked away, grief and anger fighting on her face. "You loved her that much?" "I made a promise," Ned said. "To my dying sister. I did what I had to, for Jon." Catelyn said nothing more. She walked away with slow steps, and from that day she never looked at Ned the same again. Meanwhile, in King's Landing, Robert Baratheon had fallen into a darker kind of silence. The weight of the secret poisoned him, sip by sip. He no longer joked, he no longer hunted, and he barely spoke to Cersei, who had grown bolder in his quiet. One night he sent away all his guards and sat alone in the royal chamber, a bottle of wine untouched beside him. He opened a small wooden box from his saddlebag and pulled out a folded piece of cloth, Lyanna's handkerchief, stained with dried blood. He stared at it. "Forgive me," he whispered, "for what I became after you." He wrote one final letter that night, addressed to Jon Snow, and sealed it with his own royal mark. It was never sent, because 3 days later, Robert was dead. They said it was a hunting accident, a wild boar, a slip, a wound that festered too quickly. But Varys knew, and so did Cersei. She had waited too long in silence, and silence was for the weak. The North received the news with sorrow. The South received it with plotting, but Jon Snow received it with something different: confusion. The man he believed was nothing but a drunk king had known the truth all along. A truth hidden from him, protected by two men, one bound by blood, the other by guilt. And now both were gone. For Ned Stark had been summoned to King's Landing soon after Robert's death to serve as Hand of the King to young Joffrey. But before leaving, he sent one final raven to the wall. Jon read it alone in the dark. "You were born in blood, but you are not cursed. Your mother was Lyanna. Your name was Aegon, but your path is yours to shape. Never forget. Honor is not in blood. It is in choice. Forgive me if you can." Jon wept. For the first time since he had taken the black, tears came freely, not because of pain, but because the mystery was gone. And what lay beneath it was not glory, but tragedy. His life had been carved from lies, but it had been a life, saved by love. And now he understood why Ned Stark had always looked at him with that silent sorrow. In the south, Cersei rose. She burned the letter Robert left for Jon before it could ever leave the Red Keep. She questioned those who knew too. She bribed, she threatened. She laid her claws into the throne, but the whisper still spread that a boy with Targaryen blood lived, that a dragon heir still breathed, and though the name was never confirmed and the truth was still veiled, a quiet fear settled in the capital, not of war, but of return. Years passed. Jon Snow rose in the Night's Watch ranks, unaware that the whispers from the south were inching closer. Ravens flew in shadows. Names passed through lips like ghosts. But Jon stayed true to his vow, guarding the realm, never seeking a crown. But deep within, something stirred. A memory of Lyanna's face, a face he had only seen in dreams. A promise whispered by a man who had died protecting him. A bloodline forged in fire and frost. The realm had almost forgotten the rebellion that once tore it apart, but in the coldest corners of the world and the darkest corners of power, fate had begun to move again, and Jon Snow, bastard no longer, stood, unknowingly, at the center of it all, the son of the wolf, the last breath of the dragon. And when the time came, he would have to choose, not just between love and duty, but between the truth that made him and the lie that saved him.